and on page 559. In dealing with the period of time that Joseph served as editor of the Times and Seasons between March of, and I put March because that's when he took responsibility, March of October 1842, a carefully worded statement explained that several editorials were published in the Times and Seasons of 1842. This is the quote now from the Priesthood Manual. During an 8-month period of that year, from February to October, Joseph Smith served as editor of this periodical and frequently published editorials signed Ed. Though others helped to write many of these articles, the prophet Joseph approved them and published them in his name. Now, I won't call that an official declaration by the church. We'll call it at least a semi-official declaration, and certainly approbation for the very things that I've been talking to you about now, that this was a very important paper, the Times and the Seasons, and that the things that were said in that paper then become critically important. Well, let's take a look here as we're moving right along. Joseph receives an important book, and that important book is going to happen in 1841. Dr. Bernheisel, John Bernheisel, is in New York on a mission, and a man that's there with him is named Wilford Woodruff. And Wilford Woodruff meets with Dr. Bernheisel, and this is when that book, The Incidents of Travel in Central America, and I've got a kind of a photographic reprint. Ted Burton has the original. He has got originals of these, all 4 of the originals. This came out in 2 volumes, by the way, in 1841, and became one of the best sellers of all time for that, certainly that publishing company. In fact, it outsold everything except the Bible until about 1865. So from 1841 to 1865, that's a long time to stay on the bestsellers list. And Brigham Young's going to write one of his sons and say, get rid of your Dickens, Charles Dickens, and buy Stevens and Catherwood's book. That was Brigham Young. Get rid of your other and buy this, because he wanted them to know it. So it was widely accepted, Stevens and Catherwood. But imagine, there had been no physical evidence for the prophet Joseph for all these years, from 1830 and now 1841. Well, he was very much appreciative of receiving those books, and we know that he had all 4 of them. What I didn't tell you is that Stevens and Catherwood were so successful, they went back and they wrote another 2-volume series that was called Incidents of Travel in the Yucatan. But this is called Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and the Yucatan. Well, this is the personal writings of the prophet Joseph Smith by Dean Jesse. And it's interesting because we have a letter here that Joseph is going to write on the 16th of November in 1841. And he's thanking, in this letter, he says, this is to Dr. Bernheisel, thanking him for the 2 books, the 2 volumes of this book. I received your kind present by the hand of Elder Woodruff and feel myself under many obligations for this mark of your esteem and, now talking about the book, and friendship, which to me is the more interesting as it unfolds and develops many things that are of great importance to this generation and corresponds with and supports the testimony of the Book of Mormon. I have read the volumes with the greatest of interest and pleasure, and must say that of all the histories that have been written pertaining to the antiquities of this country, it is the most luminous, the most correct, luminous, and comprehensive. How would Joseph know that it was the most correct? How would he know it was the most luminous? Go back to the History Channel. Joseph Smith, the angel Moroni, he sees these things. He sees them in vision. He's going to open up those books, and there's a, I don't expect you to be able to see these. This is all of Catherwood's paintings. That's the artist that went. Now, I'll just explain to you what this is. The book, when they went down, they go down to Belize to start with, and then they start their journeys, and they go to Copan. And Catherwood was not only an artist from England, graduated from the Royal Academy, but he was also an architect. And so when he draws some of these buildings and these pictures, they're phenomenal. I mean, he does a great job. That's one of them right there, for example, out of Copan. Well, Joseph's going to open up, he's going to see that, and guess what he's going to see? He's going to see the same things that the angel Moroni showed him. That's what he's going to see, boom. And then let's go on and see. And remember, Joseph doesn't, look how exact and precise some of these drawings are. Now, they would have been in black and white in the book. But he later went up and he had an exhibit hall like this in New York City. People had to pay like a quarter to go into the hall, and they had artifacts like from here, from Central America, because the people in America at that time had been told that there was no high civilization in the Americas. That this is, if you went to Harvard, you went to Dartmouth, you went to any of those schools, you would have been, you would have read a book called History of America, okay? And in that by William Robertson, and published in 1824. And when you read that book, it would say there was no high civilization in the Americas. They were nomads, kind of like the Bedouins, and without any civilization whatsoever. And so nobody believed that there was any high civilization. Let's take a look at another thing, all right? Here's another article. Let me just quote from this other article. I recommend you read the whole article, but I'm just going to excerpt. Stevens and Catherwood's researches in Central America abundantly testify of this thing. This particular one, by the way, wasn't challenged by the Great Lakes Advocates, but it should have been. If they're going to be consistent, you might as well challenge this one as well, even though it's also signed Ed, by the way, which means that the editor, and whose name was at the end of that edition? Joseph Smith, as editor. Stevens and Catherwood's researches in Central America abundantly testify of this thing. The stupendous ruins, the elegant sculpture, and the magnificence of the ruins of Guatemala and other cities collaborate this statement. Their ruins speak of their greatness. The Book of Mormon unfolds their history. I don't know if you remember me reading to you the word unfolds. Joseph used that word a lot. Unfolds, unfolds, unfolds. We're going to find that, and I'll talk to you about it here in just a minute, too. Okay? All right. I mentioned attribution is how you identify. It means who's the author. When we talk about attribution, that's what we're talking about. Identifying authorship. There are three ways to identify authorship. I'm really now reporting from Hull University on that. The editor, that is, the editorial was signed at the end of the individual article itself as Ed. That's one way to identify it. Or if it was a person that was invited to write that editorial, their name would appear, their actual name would appear at the end of that front page editorial, for example. That was another one. Or sometimes they use pseudonyms. Joseph sometimes would use Alpha, and Hiram would use the word Omega. And the people knew who that was, that they were the co-presidents of the church, etc. The editorial article was written in the editorial we format. Now that is significant, folks. So when you find an article written in the editorial we, that is the signature of the editor, and he doesn't need to sign. He doesn't need to sign the article. He's done it by using the editorial we. This meant that the article could be signed or unsigned at the end of the individual article, but because it was written in the editorial we, using words like we, us, and our, it was attributed to the person who signed as editor at the end of the paper in the signature block. The most important attribution was the signature block on the last page of the edition of the newspaper. And that went for all the early church newspapers, whether you're talking about the Evening and the Morning Star with W.W. Phelps at that time, or you're talking about, pick a church newspaper, turn to the last page there, and all papers at that time, turn to the last page, you'll find the signature